talk to me about Iron Man 3, and I would love to know why you particularly wanted to watch that one, because I think in the minds of a lot of people, it's not one of the stronger entries in the MCU.
Yeah, but a lot of people are dumb. Here's the thing. I think, okay, first off, I think there's some great character stuff going on.
Yeah.
I think there's some great thematic stuff going on, both within this particular movie and in the larger Marvel world. And I do think so. I believe this was the first film after the Avengers,
yes,
correct?
This is film 1 of Phase 2. Yep.
Okay. Phase 1, very little risk.
Yeah.
Like you knew what you were getting and you got it. Well, now Phase 1 is made like at this point, $2 billion.
Right.
So now you look at Phase 2, and that's when you start seeing a lot more risk.
Yeah.
You start seeing some weird things, some experimental things, and you get directors willing, and Kevin Feige willing to let them experiment with the mythos of this world. And there is a very large twist in Iron Man 3 that fans of the comic hate, and I understand it. And as I was watching it, it bothered me at first a little bit, just because it's like, oh, I guess we're not going in that direction. But then it's like, but what direction are we going in? Like, oh, how exhilarating. Yeah. Like the idea of not knowing what to expect in a franchise. Are you kidding me? Like, this was the film that kind of kicked that off for me. And it was so exciting. Yeah.
And that, obviously, Iron Man 3 is very, it's been out for many, many years at this point. I don't think we're going to spoil anything for anybody.
I'm fine to spoil it. I just didn't want to do it now.
Oh, okay. Well, we can get into it a little bit later. But
sure.
Honestly, as I was rewatching it the other night, in preparation for the podcast here, I did not remember, like, it's a lot stronger than I remember it being. There is a ton, as you said, there's a ton of really great character stuff going on here. And Tony is at his glib best, and hold on a second. I've got some notes here on my phone, so I'm gonna.
Oh, okay.
You're not gonna see me for a second here, or maybe you still do. I don't know.
That's fine.
But we'll fix this all later. As I was watching the trailers and things for this film, and I knew that the extremis plot element was going to come in. That was really exciting to me, because I was familiar with the comic book arc that had that as a prominent feature. And I don't know if you were or not, but that kicked off a very, very different status quo for Tony Stark in the comics, and probably most of our listeners are going to be aware of that. But basically it gave him, bona fide superpowers at the end of that.
Right,
he basically became a technopath in the aftermath of that story arc, and it opened the door for some really interesting story things going forward. And the way that was realized in the film at first bothered me, because I was excited to see the extraness of the comics.
Yeah.
But, again, then especially upon this rewatch now, I'm really okay with it. I think that it allowed the character to stay a little bit more grounded.
Yeah, it's. I was a little bit aware of like the Extremis storyline, and then I believe there was either a motion comic or maybe an actual like animated thing around the time.
Yeah, it was a motion
Iron
comic.
Man 3 came out. Okay, which I watched, and I was like, oh wow, this is really different than the Extremis of the movie, which I do think is actually a bit oversimplified, whether you're familiar with the comic or not, but I'm okay with it, because I will say that I think that there's a lot of pressure on Marvel or DC or anybody that's doing something based on something else. I think there's a lot of pressure to incorporate as much stuff that people know as possible. Like, you know, once Captain America showed up and the universe was going for a while, like everybody knew, like, well, we can't not do Civil War. Obviously, we have to do it. But the problem with that is that, but unless you're willing to commit a few movies to it, it's not going to be great. And that's how I feel about Extremis. Like, they've got 2 hours to incorporate this new thing and then deal with it. Like, if they wanted to just leave it open-ended, like, well, now we can deal with it in other movies, but we've got other stuff to deal with in other movies. Like, that is, as much as I do kind of love what they're doing with the extended universe, it's not a one-to-one comparison between comics and film.
And I think the way that they're doing it is really smart. And I've said this before in previous episodes. I love the way they have effectively stayed true to the core of each of these characters while being very willing to make significant story deviations from the source material.
Yeah, and what I like is that the characters, there is an actual arc from one within each film and then from one film to the other. And that's great because with any franchise, you run the risk of having the character be the same from, you know, basically be James Bond, who doesn't change from one movie to the next. Everything is basically a reset. And that is not the case with this. And I think especially with Iron Man 3. There are things I really like about Iron Man 2, especially from a character standpoint, because like that's when you see Tony Stark being genuinely self-destructive. Like, to the point where he's a jerk, you know, which is why that the scene in Iron Man 2, the fight between Rhodes and Tony, where they both have their suits. Yeah, I think that's great. And it's just one of those things that, like, oh wow, he really needs help. You know, he can't do this on his own. And I don't think that's a storyline that could have happened after Avengers. Like, he needs to feel alone for this to really work.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's I picked up on way more this time than I did on my first watching, when he's having that conversation with the kid in the garage, and the kid like knocks the suit or something, and Tony says, "Hey, he's injured. He's in pain." You know, like there's some like, and I'm not as skilled at picking up on like subtleties of subtext, but like I was able to see like there's a significant metaphor going on there. He's not just talking about the suit.
Yes, and earlier he says like that the suits are a part of him. So it's like, so the moment somebody makes a declaration like that, it's like, all right, everything from then on. Regarding the suits, you have to be able to. You can just read as much into it as you want, but that's the key. That is what I think makes the film so brilliant. Is that there is a scene in the Avengers where Captain America and where Steve and Tony are angry at each other, and
he says, "You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play." And lay down.
It's not even that. It's he says, "You take this suit off. Who are you?" And he has an answer, a glib answer, which is like, "Oh, I'm
billionaire, playboy, philanthropist."
And he has an answer ready. But those are titles. The question is, who is he actually? Because for a long time there has been, he's Iron Man. And then there's Tony, and he kind of became Iron Man because Tony was not into some great stuff. And this is a film in which he is forced to answer that question: who am I without the suit? A lot of people had a problem with how little he was in the suit in Iron Man 3. I loved it because there's a moment when the kid says, like, can't you just invent something?
Right, you're a mechanic, make something. And it's this moment. And that snaps him out of his panic attack right there. He's like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah. And it's just this wonderful moment where he's reminded that, like, he is, there's a lot more to him than just being in that suit. Like, yes, he created it, and yes, he's created a whole bunch of them, but he's more than just this protective shell. He is able to do a lot of good. Yeah. And between that and then like Pepper Potts being in genuine peril because of his recklessness, he really comes to realize who he is, what he is, and what's important to him over the course of this film. And I think you do see a change in his character in the larger franchise. I think it's interesting that in Age of Ultron, like he still is a flawed character. He still twists the idea of, I need to protect the things that are important to me. And it still causes him to act recklessly, as in, creating Ultron and stuff. But it's just very interesting to see how pivotal this movie was to his larger arc.
I think, and we're going to go down just a little bit of speculation here, I think we're going to find out that the actual creation of Ultron in the form in which we see him is going to end up having not been Tony's fault. I think we're going to end up seeing that was manipulated by Thanos. Because at the end, when he puts on the gauntlet and says, "Fine, I'll do it myself," I think that is that's an indication that he had a hand in how that was going.
And I guess he does have that. He does have the idea for Ultron, or at least a certain type of Ultron, after having that vision of like space and like these terrible things. Is that right? That's before. His idea for Ultron predates what the Scarlet Witch did in his mind. But that's true. But it's like he amps it up as a response to that. Like,
that could be
it's
true.
A thing he's working with Bruce on. And so, yeah, that's interesting. I don't often think about the cosmic stuff in regards to like the notably earthbound storylines like Ultron. But I do like the idea that Thanos is like that manipulative. But yeah. And so I love that Tony Stark is still himself in this movie. Like his interactions with that kid, in which his heart is not going to be melted.
Right. Yeah.
For this kid.
So great.
Like,
I loved it.
There are lines I can't repeat on here. Like when the kid ultimately essentially says like, "My dad left," and there's like this moment on Tony's face where it looks like something is really touching him, and instead he's like, "Well, look, people leave. No need to be wimp. No need to be a wimp about it." And he's just like, is so dismissive. And that's pure Shane Black. That type of thing is very Shane Black. Coming right up to sentimentality and then brushing it aside, or at least cheap sentimentality.
Yeah.
And so I love that
same scene. You know how I know? Because we're connected. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like, after this scene, he's like, "You know what keeps going through my head?
Where's my sandwich?
Where's my sandwich?"
It's just so good.
Yeah, it's so I love those moments, and I just think that it's delivery on a promise that we didn't realize was made in the Avengers movie, which is the idea of like Tony being forced to push himself to be self-sacrificing and also question who he ever was in the first place and who he is now. Yeah. And that's the thing is, there's narration throughout this film, which is pretty rare for these movies.
Yeah, I don't think it happens in any of the other ones. You kind of get it in Ragnarok a little bit, but that's a misdirect. It's not really narration.
Right, yes. And so, with this, it ends with him having the shrapnel taken out of his heart. He's blown up a lot of his suits.
Well, ostensibly all of them.
Ostensibly all of them. There's a hint that like he's going to start rebuilding things, but in this time, but now because he wants to,
right?
Not because he feel like he has to form his own identity.
And I'm really glad you said that, because that kind of crystallized it for me a little bit, because I was just about to say, the end of this movie, kind of doesn't jive with his appearances in a lot of the subsequent films, because there's no explanation about, why did he, how did it come to pass that he